Glory to Jesus Christ. Quo Vadis. Where are we going? The question depends on who you are. If you're a soldier, if you're a sailor, if you're a salesman, the destination is different. The obligations and responsibilities incumbent upon you are different. So to know Quo Vadis, you have to know who you are, your birthright. Allow me to share with you two stories. The first one is, you may have heard of it before, about two old men sitting around talking in the middle of the day. And they said, "You hear about Tom?" "Oh, no, I didn't hear about Tom." "Well, he ran off with Jerry's wife." "Doesn't surprise me that he'd do that." "Well, did you hear what else he did?" "No, I didn't hear." "Well, he also stole $500,000 from the company." "Not surprised." "But did you hear what else he did?" "Well, yeah, he stole his neighbor's car." "And yeah, it doesn't surprise me either." "Well, you hear what else happened?" "Well, no, I didn't hear what else happened." "Well, he was ticketed for drunk driving." It doesn't surprise me." And the second guy is thinking, he says, "Well, I do have one question." "Well, what is it? What is it?" "Who the heck's going to teach his Sunday school class?" Integrity. We need to have integrity. You squeeze the orange and the juice is going to come out. Whatever the fruit is, you squeeze it, it's going to come out. You have to have integrity. It all shows eventually. Second story is more factual, and it involves a courthouse in the Midwest. And what's interesting about this courthouse is that when it rains on the peaked roof, where the raindrop falls determines whether it goes eventually into the Atlantic Ocean or into the Gulf of Mexico. This courthouse sits right on that dividing line of two great water basins. So if the water drops a little bit on the west side of that roof, down it goes and finds its way into the Mississippi and down into the Gulf. Another inch to the east on that courthouse roof, down through the gutter, the drain, into the river, out to the Atlantic Ocean, and through the Great Lakes. Amazing how one little fraction of an angle makes so much of a difference. And this is diakrisis, being decisive. The decisions you make determine the outcome of where you go. Discernment, decisiveness. In St. Paul's letter to the Romans, he tells us to flee from the corruption of this world and to put on the mind of Christ. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. And in his letter to Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, speaking to the young bishop, he says, "Do not be entangled in civil pursuits, but aim to please the one who enlisted you." Men of God, you are enlisted men. You didn't bring yourself here. He called you. Aim to please the one who enlisted you. How do we do that? As St. Paul says, by the renewal of our minds. And here I want to put a challenge before you tonight. And this challenge is going to extend into your mind. Now, I'm going to ask you to attempt something great. Attempt something so great for God that it's doomed to failure unless God is in it. Attempt something so great for God that unless he is in it, it's doomed to failure. Do not set the bar low. And here's the challenge. Put off the false image of what a Christian man should be, and renew your mind and raise your expectations as to what Christian manhood entails. Tonight, I ask you to look in the mirror and undergo this diakrisis, like the raindrop, to go one way or the other, but not both. Tonight, I ask you, will you exchange the kitty cat model of Christian manhood for the Lion of Judah model? If you choose the kitty cat standard for Christian manhood, you will receive praise. You may end up in a place where they sing all are welcome in the city of God. But if you choose the Lion of Judah model, you will be singing Faith of Our Fathers. Christ will give to you three things, those same three things that he gave to his haggard band of men so very long ago. And the first thing he will give you is that he will give you the gift that will enable you to be completely fearless. The second gift he will give you, should you take up the standard and assume Christian manhood as he deems it, is that you will be absurdly happy. Think of Cleopas and the others who encountered him on the road to Emmaus, running all the way back. And the third thing he will give you is the constant promise that you will be in constant trouble. You will be fearless, you will be absurdly happy, but I assure you, you will be in constant trouble. And look at what this constant trouble wrought for our world. It was the Lion of Judah brand of manhood that changed our world, that gave us a St. Lawrence, that gave us an Ignatius of Antioch, that gave us a Stephen, all the great martyrs down through the ages. This was a Christianity that had fangs, had claws, had heart. And what's happened down through the ages is that we've been given a muted, domesticated version of a defanged, declawed, polite Christian manhood. I only came to know of this recently, actually, within the past year and a half. I'm ashamed to say it. I came to know of this because of a parishioner of mine was trying to adopt children in Ukraine. And I happen to speak Ukrainian, and I understand Russian. And he was going over the day that the Russians invaded to rescue these little girls that he wanted, one little girl he wanted to adopt, and eventually her siblings. He didn't know the language, so that very day, we had to make a decision, diakrisis, and we jumped on an airplane, and we went into Ukraine when everybody else was leaving. I don't say this to bring any attention to myself, but I say this because of the effect of it afterwards, is that people from all over the country were reaching out. And it occurred to me that this was something that maybe they don't see too often, is a decisive example in the middle of danger. We're really ruled by risk managers, attorneys, publicists. But this diakrisis that Christian manhood demands, this decisiveness, is in short supply. And people began to ask me about this all the time, everywhere I went. And it came down to this, that this parishioner who gets the praise for doing this gave a model to our city of Pittsburgh of what the Lion of Judah would have done. So I want to put before you a question. What is the one profession in the New Testament that comes out of it unscathed? If you were to read from Matthew through Revelation, and you were to tally all of the professions listed there, which one would come through unscathed? It wouldn't be the physicians. There's the parable of the widow who loses all of her money on doctors trying to have herself healed. It wouldn't be the tax collectors, certainly. It wouldn't be the lawyers. It wouldn't be the priests or the scribes. It's the centurions, the rough foreign occupiers. Think about this. Now, we're not talking about the rough and tumble soldiers. We're talking about the officers, the centurions. There were the legion with 6,000 soldiers. And then the Romans broke the legion up into groups of 100. And the men who were the trained officers, the picked men who were overseeing those hundreds were the centurions. And it's interesting how this comes about. For in 22 of the civilizations in history that have imploded, 19 of them collapsed from within. 19 of the 22 collapsed from within. And the last institution in every case that fell were the officers of the military. What was it about the centurions of Rome in particular? There are three things as we read the Gospels. You can see that they were disciplined, they were decisive, diakrisis, and they were dutiful. We see the first mention of this is in Capernaum, where this centurion has a son, and the son is ill, dying, in fact. He calls Jesus. And the centurion says to Jesus, I'm a man who has authority and people under me. I say to one, come, and he comes. I say to another, go, and he goes. Heal my boy, but don't come under my roof. Just say the word. Just say the word. And Jesus marvels. Not in all of Israel have I seen such faith as this man. So here we have a man who was a foreign occupier of a mighty military, and Jesus praises him. Praises him. No doubt he earned a lot of flack from his close friends for daring to do this. But this is the nature of a man, is to be decisive, to speak the truth. And the second example we see in the case of Simon of Cyrene, being plucked out of the crowd by one of the officers, helps Jesus carry the cross. And at Calvary, you see this centurion who we don't know his name in Scripture, but from tradition we know, Longinus. And what's interesting about this man is that a pagan soldier makes a declaration of faith. That while the leaders of Israel were in the temple sacrificing the lamb, and the temple was rent in two in Matthew's gospel, at that very time, this unwashed pagan centurion, with his spear, pierced the veil of the temple. For that is what Christ's skin is. For he is the temple in John 2, that will be raised up on the third day. And if he is the temple, then what is his skin other than the veil that envelops it? And as this veil was pierced, out came blood and water. And tradition tells us that Longinus' one eye, which was infected and wasn't, some say it was blind, and one eye was healed. And the declaration of faith that truly this was the Son of God comes from this centurion, a disciplined, trained man. The third case we have is in the life of St. Peter. And we see in Peter that there is Cornelius. Cornelius is interesting in that he was respected. He was respected because he was a man of faith and works. It seems that he was following the Jewish hours of prayer. The Jews loved him, for he built synagogues for the Jews. Now you think about that. In any country of the world today in which there is a war, think, for example, of Russia, where they've invaded Ukraine. Would you have Russian soldiers building Ukrainian Catholic churches? No, it wouldn't happen. But here you have a centurion, leader of an occupying force, who loved the Jews and built a synagogue for them. And he believed. And you see the role that he played with Peter. And he goes to the house of Simon the tanner. A favorable depiction. And on it goes with Paul. And you have the example of Paul, who goes into Ephesus, and he's associating with a Gentile. And then after he's finished speaking to the Gentile, he goes into the synagogue. And the Jews there want to throw him out, for they saw him associating with a Gentile. And there's a big uproar. And the one who rescues him is the centurion Claudius, who comes and whisks him away to the citadel of Antonius. And from there, he eventually goes to Rome. And in Rome, it's another centurion, Julius, who loves the words of Paul and allows him to leave the prison for 2 years so that he can preach the gospel. Now, this is a mindset that we need to adopt, because everything that we assume about things militaristic is very negative. But here in the Gospels, it's the opposite, that the occupying force, and not just low-ranking soldiers, but high-ranking soldiers, the centurions, consistently come across positively, without exception, in the New Testament. I want to put before you some examples of how our mindset can change. Now, these aren't examples between good and evil. Some of them are, but some of them aren't. I'll give you one that is not a moral example. It's a spiritual discipline approach. You look at the Latin West, and you compare it to the Christian East and their approach to fasting. So more or less, in the Latin West, the approach to fasting is that you can eat with certain exceptions on certain days. Now flip it around. What's the mindset? In the East, you don't eat with certain exceptions so as to live. Lent is very tough. I'll give you another example. The example comes from the liturgist, Father Robert Taft, who says that if you're coming to liturgy asking what I'm going to get out of it, you're already at the wrong place. And is that not true? That we come to liturgy thinking, what am I going to get out of this? That's a worldly mindset from a fallen world. We have to follow Paul's advice in Romans to cast that off and put on the mindset of Christ. I'm not coming to the liturgy to get something out of it, but to give everything I have to it. This is my work, on the Lord's Day especially. There are other examples of how mindsets need to change. Before Christ, you look at these pagan religions, and you can find even in the writings of Buddha, the admonition that do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. And Christ comes along, and his mindset is completely different. And he says, do unto others what you would have them do unto you. Now, which of the two is more difficult? The one Christ gives. Which of the two is more fulfilling? The one Christ gives. Differences in a mindset. You look into the life of David, and Saul and the mighty men of Israel looked at Goliath, and they wouldn't fight him, for he was too big to fight, too big to kill. And along came David with a different mindset, and he looked at Goliath and he said, he's too big to miss. It's all about mindset. We can take a look at the issue of sexuality in our culture. There's the phrase men use, I got some, And then you look at the sexual act par excellence in the Eucharist. Take, this is my body given for you. See, taking, getting, giving. Gives his body. Two different mindsets. And so, quo vadis. What are we to do? We are to change our mindset, to put off the conventional way of looking at things, and to undertake a renewal of our minds so that we truly become centurions for Christ. And as I look out here, I see this. You are the centurions in the church in America today. There are those who come to church, the Christers, Christmas and Easter. There are those who come once a month, twice a month. There are those who check in, check out every Sunday. It's an obligation. But then there are those, the elite shock troops, people who have cold showers and holy hours, people who are interested, men who are interested in taking up the mantle of manhood and becoming what they've always been formed to be, saints, to fight the good fight. War is your birthright. War is your birthright. And whether you like war or not, it's coming for you. There is the external manifestation of war, which we see in Armenia and Azerbaijan. We see it in Ukraine. We see it in Israel. We see it in Yemen. And I think, friends, we're living in biblical times. The conflagration is about to begin. But underpinning this war, the war of bullets, is the deeper war, because that external war is merely symptomatic of men who chose not to be decisive in the spiritual battle for their hearts. Why are there wars? St. James answers that for us in James chapter 1. There are wars because of the passions in the heart. If a man does not take possession of his heart, like a centurion in boot camp, and runs a 5K at 8,000 feet in the air, then guess what happens? The demons, for this is what we are facing, they take possession of the heart through a torrent of desires and passions for sex, for money, for disordered sex, disordered money, disordered power, misdirected sex, misdirected money, misdirected power. All of those things, to the point that the heart is a vehicle of war. And then it spills out from that man's inner chamber into his family, and from his family into his society. And then when you have multiple societies dealing with this same spiritual fallout, because there were no centurions who were willing to engage in the battle of the heart, then you have the manifestation of it in society. And people no longer know what a boy is or a girl is or what a marriage is. And from there, it leads to war. So the task of each of you, men of God, is to undo today what your fathers refused to do yesterday. And that is to become centurions, disciplined, decisive, and dutiful. It's our honor. It's a great task. Now, each of you are centurions with a great battle that we all have to face. It's a common battle to defend the faith and to defend your families. You and I are on different terrain, different issues, different vocations, different problems in your community. The terrain is different, but the enemy is the same. It's Satan. And he seeks to devour you. But you are the elite guard. You're regular communicants. You're going to communion. Take up the mantle that you've been given from the moment of your baptism, of your confirmation, to be soldiers in the war of all wars. This war will not go away. You cannot pretend it away. You cannot forget it away or wave it away. It demands diakrisis, like that dropping rain. You must either fight it or submit to it. You are either with Christ or without Christ. Joshua is the type that we should look to in this moment. For after taking the Israelites, after Moses died, he took them through the Jordan and entered into the promised land. And what's there is most appealing to us, because there is a theophanic appearance of Christ in Joshua chapter 5. For they come through the Jordan, and there they are at the gates of Jericho, and there is one standing on a bank with a sword in his hand. And Joshua, the general of Israel, says, "Who are you? Are you for us or are you against us?" And this one being replies, says, "I am the head of the host of heaven." And Joshua falls down and worships him. And that same question is posed to each of us. Are we for Christ or against him? And if we are for him, then let us begin that great task of renewing our minds by purging from our minds the false understanding of what it means to be a Christian man. Polite, circumspect, defanged. And to take up what Christ has told us to be. For we see that from the time of Jericho until the book of Revelation, that there is a consistent theme in both apparitions, both appearances, that he's a warrior. He's a warrior. We live at a time in which the nature of what it means to be a man and a father is distorted. I want to close by reminding you of how men originally lived. That when man was created, he was created to guard and to cultivate or grow the garden. This takes on a more profound meaning when we look at the state of the universal church and of our country. That you are here, yes, to guard your family, your women, your wives, your children, and that bastard, the devil, who seeks to devour and destroy both of them. But it takes on a far greater symbolism as well. You are here to guard and to protect the faith of our fathers that's been handed down to you at the price of great blood. And this moment is unique in history. For up until now, there has not been one case in history that I know of, and I'm willing to be corrected, of where the laymen led the renewal of the church. Quo vadis? Lead the renewal by renewing your minds, by purging the corrupted worldly estimations that have been put in there and put on Christ. Defend the women, defend the children, defend the faith. Have no fear. We have no fear because at the beginning of this modern era, the Mother of God appeared. She appeared in Fatima at the dawn of the nuclear age. This humble Virgin of Nazareth appeared clothed with the sun. Nothing in Revelation, public or private, is accidental, for God wills that all come to know the truth and to be saved. And so there is nothing in Revelation that could be used, well, there's nothing in Revelation that's objectively wrong from God. The devil can distort things. And so it's most important for us to understand that the specter of nuclear war, the specter of complete destruction in which men harness the power of the sun to destroy others, as our forefathers once harnessed the power of rivers to give life, that nevertheless the Mother of God gives us a symbol as that sun dances, that the Lord will place the humble in charge of the earth. Go forth, my friends, quo vadis, defend the faith, defend your wives, defend the children in this culture which has lost its orientation. And that goal, that ultimate orientation, is to see the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the one who Joshua saw with the sword on the bank in Jericho. He is the one that's calling you. Go forth. Glory to Jesus Christ.